Okay, so continuing on creating our parameters on our asset. In this video, I want to get the belly control in place. And this is going to be interesting because it means creating that simulate button and writing the script on the asset that's going to deal with baking out the animation data for our belly jiggle and then bringing that animation data back in. So let's start out by promoting up parameters. As we go, we're going to have to link some of them up. And then once we've got those in place, we can create that script and get that script being called on. So I'm going to bring up the type properties for my asset. Before I do that, let's allow editing of contents, then bring up the type properties. I'm going to minimize the master control folder, the hips, shoulders and spine folder, the display, transform and subnet folders, create a new folder inside torso, and this is going to be the belly folder. Fantastic. And I'm going to basically want to have the translation parameters for that belly control, which if you recall, it can only move in 2 dimensions, not 3 dimensions. Now, instead of promoting up the parameters, which can cause issues because I only want to have a float with 2 values in as opposed to with 3, I'm actually going to create a new float vector 2 and then reference that parameter down inside our asset. So let's create a new float vector 2. With the name of belly T for belly translation, the label of translate, and then if I accept this and OK through the warning, jump inside our goblin character, find our belly control, and on translate X I'm going to reference that belly T X parameter. And for Y and for Z, that's going to be belly T Y. So now we have both our X and Z promoted up, so that at the asset level, instead of seeing 3 parameters for if we promoted up our translates, we're just seeing those 2 parameters, but they are connected next to each other. Let's bring back up our type properties. And I will just collapse some of these down very quickly. There we go. So now after our translate, I want to create a new folder inside the belly. And this is all now going to be relating to the belly jiggle. The first thing I want to do is create a toggle that allows us to bypass that jiggle. That's going to be driving the bypass belly chop, which was that blend object that we created. So I'm going to create a name of bypass jiggle and a label of bypass jiggle. Let's accept that. OK. Jump inside our asset, and on that belly bypass object that we created, the blend object for our sequence, I'm going to set this equal to, now when we check this, we actually want to bypass the animation data coming from chops, and when we want to bypass that, we actually want to take in the first input. That means when it's set to a value of 1, I actually want input 0. When it's set to a value of 0, I want input 1. So I'm going to take 1 minus that parameter we just created. So 1 minus the belly bypass, actually jiggle bypass, I believe we named it, jiggle bypass. Or was that even bypass jiggle? There we go, the bypass jiggle toggle that we just created. So currently it's set to a value of 0 because indeed we want to be bypassing the jiggle, and that means that if we come in and start modifying our controls, we are going to see that the belly does follow along with our controls. However, if we uncheck bypass jiggle, that belly is now going to be following the animation data on disk. That is working fantastically. Let's bring back up the type properties for our asset and collapse hips, shoulders and spine. There we go. So the next thing I want to promote up is the animation file, where we can specify where we want to save that file. Down on the file chop, we have a parameter for doing just that, for when we bring it back in. If I promote that up and then use that parameter in our script for saving out the file, we'll know that the file will get saved out and loaded back in from the same location. So I'm going to promote from nodes inside our belly chops network. Down inside we have the file 1. Inside the file parameter we have that channel file parameter. I'm going to make sure that we do have prefix, link name and label unchecked, and then inside the jiggle folder I'm going to promote up that channel file. Now I do want to create a separator between our bypass jiggle and the channel file. We've got that channel file, so let's give that the label of anim file, and we want a bclip file in there, and the name of belly file name. So now we can actually jump over to the defaults, and it's actually defaulted to what I wanted it to be, which was $hip $belly.bclip. That means wherever we've got our current hip file saved, in that folder, create a file called belly.bclip. Fantastic. So we now have that in place. We can also create that button that later we'll create the script for, which will be our belly simulate button, which will have the label of simulate. So that will indeed simulate the animation on our belly. We can then bring a new separator into that folder. The last couple of parameters I want to promote up before we create that script will be the jiggle stiffness and jiggle damping from our jiggle chop down inside our belly chop. So we've got our jiggle chop. Inside the jiggle folder, I want to promote up the stiffness and the damping. And I'm going to give this the label of jiggle stiffness and jiggle damping, and I will leave these with their default parameter names since we have nothing else that's really referring to them. I guess I could append jiggle in front just so that when the animator's working with this, it makes a little bit more sense when they see these in their parameter pane or in their channel editor if they are indeed animating these parameters. So I will actually go ahead and append jiggle in front of them. So all that's left to do now is set up that simulate button. So I'm going to create a script on our asset. So let's create a Python module. Inside the Python module, I'm going to define a new function that's going to be the belly simulate function. And inside that function, we need to save out our animation data. And then we need to force that file chop to reload the animation data. So to save out the belly animation data, for those of you who followed Technical Rigging 5 where we set up our vehicle's automation systems, this is going to follow a very similar pattern to the way we used saving out animation data on that project. So we're going to grab a file name first, and that's going to be equal to who.pwd, that's ourselves, this node, .valpalm, and the parameter I want to evaluate was that belly file name parameter we just created. So that will get the file name. What do I want to be saving this file? Where do I want to save it to? And under what name? The operator is what node do I want to be saving out? That's equal to who.pwd.path. That's going to give me the current path to my asset. I know from within there I have /belly chops. That takes me inside that belly chops network /out. That is the null that has the animation data we want to be saving. And then we can go ahead and call on the hscript expression, so who.hscript. And this is a hscript command as opposed to, I guess, an hscript expression. This is actually an hscript command. The command is opsave. It takes in two parameters that need to be space separated. So after opsave, we need a space. We then need the operator that we wanted to save out. Now, of course, this just takes in a string, but what I'm going to pass it is a concatenated string from both strings and parts of strings that we've already created earlier. So I'm going to append operator, then append that space between the operator and the file name. So we're going to have opsave, what operator are we saving, and what file are we saving that to. That will save our animation data out to disk. Once we have that saved out to disk, we need to force a reload of that animation data to make sure that our chop network indeed is working with the latest version of that animation data. To do that, I need to get access to that file chop, that node that's bringing in our animation data. I need to force it to recook, force it to reload that animation data. So I'm going to say who.pwd.node, and I need to specify a node relative to us. I know it's down inside belly chops. I know that node was named file1. And I'm going to tell that node to cook. I'm going to tell it that, yes, we want to force it to recook. So I'm going to tell it to cook and pass that true. That is going to conclude our belly simulate function. So we can now jump over and call on our belly simulate function. So I've got the simulate button. I need to tell it to use the Python script language for its callback script. And I'm going to tell it that when it's clicked to call the who.pwd, that's us, .hda module, that's that Python module we just created, .belly simulate, which was the function that we just defined for simulating that animation data. There we go, the belly simulate function. So with that, if we accept and OK through that pop-up, and jump back up to the asset level. And we can test this out. I'm going to right click, save our operator type, then right click and match current definition. And let's test this out. We know that the bypass jiggle toggle itself works. Let's test out our simulating. So I'm going to create some very simple animation on our hips. So I'm going to key at frame 1, then key down here at frame 49, and then let's say that, yeah, we'll just have that motion because that should be enough motion to give the belly some momentum, and after that it should jiggle around a bit before it stops. So we're going to jump in and click on the simulate button, and that's cooking our operators. We saw it's cooking our operators. That's now going to have updated that animation on disk. Now currently we aren't using that animation, but if we come in and uncheck bypass jiggle, we can see that we get some lag and then we get that jiggle. Now that may be very hard to see unless I zoom way in here on the belly, but we can see that there we go, we are getting some jiggle in place, and if we were to tweak our jiggle parameters that would control the jiggle, but I'm happy with how that's working. So let's jump to our hips, and I'm going to set ourselves back to frame 1 and delete the channels to remove that animation data. I am going to go ahead and bypass our jiggle again so that we aren't working with our jiggle. And with that, that is going to conclude setting up the belly controls on our asset. Thanks a lot, everyone.